What's poppin', fellow Hellspawn? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. If y'all wanted a breakdown of the Spawn movie from 1997, you ain't gotta sell your soul to the devil to get one. We got you covered here on Heavy Spoilers for the low price of $3.99, plus shipping and handling. And by shipping and handling, I of course mean liking and subscribing. It costs nothing, and it is a great way to support the Heavy Spoilers channel. But without further ado, let us break this cult classic cape movie on down, shall we? The 1997 Spawn movie is of course based on the popular comic book series created by writer and artist Todd MacFarlane, one of the core founders of Image Comics, who had previously worked with Marvel Comics in the 80s and 90s, helping bring their characters to life with his art, with his most notable achievement being creating the original design for Peter Parker's goopy alien adversary, Venom, which is primarily why Venom and Spawn are so similar in both their design and natures as dark symbiotes. But even though the character Venom would be published way before Spawn, Todd MacFarlane actually would come up with the design for Spawn way in the past when he was just an aspiring young teenage artist. This early picture of Spawn was from the year 1977 when Todd MacFarlane was just 16 years old. And after writing for Marvel for a couple of years, Todd MacFarlane would crave more creative control over the characters that he created. So together with Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Jim Valentino, Eric Larson, Will Spataccio, and Mark Silvestri, MacFarlane would co-found Image Comics in 1992. And in that same year, MacFarlane would go on to introduce Spawn to the world, not knowing that Spawn would become the most lucrative creator-owned comic of all time. The huge hype behind this new property would then eventually lead to the quick development of the live-action film just 5 short years later. But speaking of huge hype, we've got a bunch of amazing merch based on properties that you're hyped about over at heavyspoilers.shop. We've got shirts based on the Fallout TV show, Avengers Doomsday, It Welcomes to Derry, Stranger Things, and so much more. So visit the Heavy Spoilers merch store at heavyspoilers.shop today to pick up something hype for your body. New Line Cinema would end up nabbing the film rights to Spawn for the low price of $1. And the reason for this is because Todd MacFarlane was a little bit of a creative control freak and wanted to make sure that the movie being created reflected his original creation faithfully. And before making the deal with New Line Cinema, Columbia Pictures was actually extremely interested in being the ones to adapt the comic, as early as Spawn's very first issue, because watching Spawn #1 sell 1.7 million copies very much fueled their eagerness. But unfortunately, they were not able to give MacFarlane the creative flexibility that he desired for the project. But yeah, even though director Tim Burton was the production's original and ideal choice for the movie, Spawn would end up being directed by visual effects artist Mark DePay instead. Working for Industrial Light and Magic, DePay would do CG for films like 1989's The Abyss, 1991's Terminator 2 Judgment Day, where he worked on the effects for the liquid T-1000 Terminator, as well as 1993's Jurassic Park, where he used his skills on the CG dinosaurs. And his partner in crime throughout his career was fellow visual effects artist Steve Williams, who was affectionately known as Spaz. After both DePay and Spaz left Industrial Light and Magic together, they would form their own movie production company called Pull Down Your Pants Pictures, the same production company that would go on to produce this very movie. And it's a big reason why Al Simmons' dog is named Spaz in the movie, after visual effects artist Steve Spaz Williams. Because in the comics, Al's dog is actually a girl named Shauna, who was introduced in Spawn issue #3. But yeah, even though DePay's passion for VFX is what led him to a VFX-heavy project like Spawn 1997, his passion is kind of a big reason why the story of the movie suffered hardcore. Because according to Spawn actor Michael Jai White himself in an interview that he did with Collider, DePay cutting out important story and character development elements from a superior earlier cut of the movie in favor of adding more cool VFX shots is the main reason why the actual writing for the movie sucked.
The first cut had something like 71 special effect things in it, and the story was absolutely intact. You see, my character starts off, in a loving relationship, and you see what his home life is and why he wants to get out of doing the things he's doing.
Right.
And then there was so much editing and so many changes that the director, who's a special effects guy, I believe by the end of it, there was like 414 special effects shots. And he was excited about doing special effects shots.
Right.
And the story elements just suffered and suffered. And there were no longer any scenes that depicted, Al Simmons' early life.
Right.
So I felt
Which
like
is kind of the crux of what it's all about.
Exactly. It's about storytelling. And so now I seem to come off as a disgruntled, hamburger face who's trying to I guess jeopardize my best friend's relationship.
Right.
Because now it shows him with my ex-wife.
Right.
And so I was like, well, how does that happen? It seems to me the people who are already enamored with Spawn, they're the ones that like the movie the most. There are people who just said, what the hell? I didn't understand what was going on.
Right.
And how did the devil just reach in and pick up the clown and did this? And there was you looked at, Martin Sheen and a bomb, you pull a bomb out. None of that was in the movie before.
Right.
The director came up with, I remember he told me, wow, I took a look of yours and then I made that into this, a bio bomb coming out of, I'm like, I don't understand what the hell's going on.
Michael would go on to explain how DePay's initial story focus and less VFX-heavy cut of Spawn would please the higher-ups at New Line Cinema so much that they trusted DePay to do whatever he wanted with his VFX budget. However, because DePay's final project was so atrocious, New Line Cinema would become a lot more strict and controlling when it came time to produce the Blade movie in 1998. Like Blade director Stephen Norrington would have far less freedom than DePay did when it came time to adapting Marvel's first black superhero film. And speaking of Blade, we actually have a breakdown for the entire Blade trilogy here on Heavy Spoilers, by the way, so be sure to check those out after watching this video. DePay's enthusiasm for computer effects would cause the production to spend $20 million more than their original $20 million budget. And ultimately, over the course of 11 months, the production would end up using around 22 VFX companies in order to match DePay's vision, with Industrial Light and Magic taking on most of the load themselves at the price of $8.3 million. But unfortunately for DePay and New Line Cinema as a whole, Spawn would disappoint audiences worldwide, leading to the cancellations of 2 Spawn sequels that were meant to release in 1998 and 1999, respectively. However, a new Spawn film has been in the works over at Blumhouse for a couple of years now, after having been announced in 2017. It was originally envisioned by Todd MacFarlane to be more of a horror film with very little Spawn action at all, which is kind of weird. But that's the direction that Todd MacFarlane was heading when he was intending on being both writer and director, despite never having directed a film in his life. Actor Jamie Foxx had signed on to play Spawn way back in 2018, but has never gone beyond seeing some concept art and early story ideas. So whether or not this reboot ends up getting made is anybody's guess, really, because, who knows. But yeah, the movie begins with a voiceover from Cagliostro, played by British actor Nicole Williamson. Within this film's continuity, Cagliostro was a knighted assassin from the 15th century before he was ultimately killed and convinced to be a hellspawn servant of Malbolgia. However, Cagliostro would ultimately rebel against Malbolgia and start fighting for God's army instead. Cagliostro's origin is a little bit different in the Spawn comic book continuity, because after being introduced in Spawn issue number 9, it would ultimately be revealed down the line that Cagliostro was actually the biblical character Cain, the petty as hell son of Adam and Eve, who murdered his own brother Abel out of jealousy in the book of Genesis chapter 4. Despite Abel's death being a complete accident on his part, he would still be known as the world's first ever killer. And because of this, he would be offered a deal with Malbolgia to be his hellspawn. But even though he would accept, his true goal was to become the new leader of hell himself. And after defecting from Malbolgia, Cain would end up becoming the mentors of different hellspawns throughout time, while changing his identity along the way, taking various names like Malchus, Merlin, and Faustus before ultimately settling on Nicholas Cagliostro. And as Cagliostro, he would become the mentor of Al Simmons and help him use his necroplasm symbiotic suit. And even though Cagliostro had once used his hellspawn powers to manipulate necroplasm like Spawn can, he had stopped using his powers altogether, mostly because he knew that he would die the moment he had exhausted the last drop of power that Malbolgia gave to him. So he basically just used the very last reserves of his hellspawn powers to prolong his lifespan. But anyways, during Cagliostro's exposition, we learn that the devil's name in this universe is indeed Malbolgia. The character Malbolgia is introduced in the very first issue of Spawn, and while he is presented as Hell's #1 ruler in this movie, in the actual Spawn lore, he is merely just one of the many rulers of the Hell dimension, with his rule being over the 8th circle of Hell. And speaking of the 8th circle of Hell, Malbolgia's name name actually comes from the word Malbolge, which is the name of the 8th circle of hell in Dante's Inferno. And to mirror this, whenever Malbolgia speaks in the Spawn movie, his voice doesn't actually come out of his physical mouth, but instead is produced through the actual hell realm itself, like he's speaking through hell. And we also learn from Cagliostro how Malbolgia has been using human beings to cause death and destruction on Earth, with his main goal being to gather up enough souls of the damned to storm the gates of heaven and defeat God once and for all, with Spawn leading the charge. This is of course in line with the Bible's prophecy of Armageddon as told in the final chapters of the book of Revelations, the final chapter in the Bible, with Malbolgia specifically trying to make Spawn fill the role of the Antichrist / the Beast figure. And in order to prepare the world for Armageddon, Malbolgia has also sent his lieutenant down to seduce and manipulate the most powerful amongst mankind in order to maximize global suffering.
No, but... Oops! A wet one. I hope I didn't stain my underwear. Look at that. Skid marks.
Charmed, I'm sure.
And this lieutenant is referred to humans as the Clown, but his real name is actually the Violator, played by actor John Leguizamo in a massive bodysuit. But yeah, after the intro, we are brought to a military airbase in Hong Kong, China, where Al Simmons, the most dangerous mercenary in America, is on a top secret mission of murder. Michael Jai White immediately shows off his extensive background in martial arts when he performs a swift kick on the first airport lookout tower guard. Studying martial arts since he was about 7 or 8 years old, Michael Jai White has spent the 2 decades since mastering as many forms of kicking ass as he could. A black belt in Kyokushin karate when he was about 14 years old, which is around the same age that he first started being a karate instructor, which is super impressive. And Michael's deep interest in both martial arts and acting would eventually lead him to pick up small roles in various films, like as a background fighter in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Secret of the Ooze in 1991, and a soldier in Jean-Claude Van Damme's Universal Soldier film from 1992. But it would be his role as boxing legend Mike Tyson in HBO's 1995 Tyson movie that would really propel him as one of Hollywood's best martial arts actors. And before Michael Jai White would actually secure the Spawn role, a series of other actors were heavily considered, including Denzel Washington, Samuel L. Jackson, Will Smith, Ving Rhames, Wesley Snipes, Hakeem Alston, LL Cool J, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac, which is quite the wild list. Michael Jai White's presence in this movie came at the cost of him appearing as the Mortal Kombat character Jax in the 1997 Mortal Kombat Annihilation film. He was offered the role but could not take it because he wanted to play a lead role as Spawn instead. But luckily, White would still be able to play Jax down the line in the Mortal Kombat Legacy web series. But anyways, Simmons then brutally mows down the remaining resistance before setting off a smart rocket to explode the plane of Algerian resistance leader Joseph Azamafar. Joseph's name appears in Al's high-tech green night vision smart binoculars before he fires the rockets, which is especially funny considering that the target's last name is Am I Far? Almost like he's asking if he's far enough from Al's position. Feels like a little bit of fourth wall breaking there, but who knows? And speaking of Al's goggles, I like how the movie has him wear a black mask with green goggles from the jump, as that look subtly foreshadows his transformation into the black-masked and green-eyed Spawn. And even though this opening scene is supposed to be set all the way in Hong Kong, China, when the rocket starts flying from the tower, we can clearly see that this tower is the air traffic control tower for the Los Angeles airport, which is kind of funny. Then, after the fiery intro credit sequence, we hear a news report from XNN news anchor Natalie Ford covering the attack in Hong Kong. Natalie Ford is played by actress Rabia Lamorte, who previously played the character Jenny Calendar in the first few seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And in the first issue of the Spawn comic, we see this character appear as a news character for CNN, but in this universe, she works for the fictional XNN. We are then brought to a secret meeting between Clown the Demon and CIA Director Jason Wynn, played by a 56-year-old Martin Sheen. And even though I personally believe that Martin Sheen was hilariously miscast for this particular role, Martin Sheen himself was super excited to be involved in the production, as he always thought the idea of portraying a character and a beloved comic book property was intriguing. And before starring in the Spawn movie, Martin Sheen's main superhero credit was for providing providing the voice of the evil character Sly Sludge for the first 3 seasons of the popular Captain Planet cartoon. Captain Planet, he's the hero, gonna take pollution down to 0 until everybody in 2025 started using AI and started polluting the planet and shit. And of course, much later on, Martin Sheen would play the role of Peter Parker's Swiss-cheesed uncle, Benjamin Parker, in both Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man films. The character Jason Wynn made his first appearance in the very first issue of Spawn, and is 1 issue older than Clown, who made his appearance in Spawn issue number 2. And over Clown's shoulder during this scene is a not so subtly placed picture of a nuclear explosion, purposely placed there as a visual representation of Clown's desire for an apocalypse of humanity's own making. Clown expresses impatience about Jason's 5-year plan to produce a deadly virus before demanding that he eliminate Al Simmons for the glory of Malbolgia. And while Jason is opposed to the idea of eliminating his best mercenary, Al would soon give him no choice when he is later confronted by Simmons for the unnecessary loss of life following his Hong Kong mission. But a little bit before that, we arrive at the Simmons household, where Al's best friend Terry Fitzgerald waits for him outside of his house with a newspaper in hand. Todd MacFarlane actually created the character of Terry Fitzgerald as a completely black man. However, he and the director were pressured by the executives to change the ethnicity of the character from black to white. It's super messed up, but they felt like if there's going to be an all-black love triangle in the film, the general audience would assume Spawn to be a black people movie, exclusively aimed at a black audience, which is stupid. So they decided to cast a white man in the role, specifically actor Edward Norton, who was a relatively hot new name in Hollywood after earning an Oscar nomination for his breakout role in 1996's Primal Fear. However, Norton would end up dropping out of the movie, which would lead to D.B. Sweeney securing the role instead. A similar case of racist studio race swapping almost happened with Will Smith's character in 1996 Independence Day, which I covered in my breakdown of the movie that you can find on this channel if you guys want to find out more. But yeah, the USA Today newspaper in Terry's hands covers the devastating Hong Kong airport explosion. However, one thing that this newspaper also does is establish the current year in this scene to be 1996, because on the top left of the paper, we can see that Michael Jordan had recently won a basketball game that had the score of 107-96, something that would happen on June 5th, 1996 during Game 1 of the NBA Finals, which featured the Chicago Bulls going up against the Seattle Supersonics. And it makes sense that a newspaper like this would make its way onto the production set, as Spawn was actually filmed from August 13th to November 13th, 1996. And a little bit further down the newspaper, we can see a red section labeled Campaign 1996, which talks about how presidential candidates Bill Clinton and Bob Dole are each trying to make moves to appeal to voters. And while this is a minor detail, this is kind of a big deal considering that it's been widely assumed that the events of the main Spawn film happen in the year 1997, the same year that the Spawn movie released in theaters. However, if time is supposed to jump forward 5 years after this 1996 newspaper, then most of the Spawn movie takes place in the year 2001, making Spawn the very first major superhero film to take place during the new millennium. Like, everybody thought that that honor belonged to the first X-Men movie, but no, technically Spawn 1997 deserves that crown. The name of Al Simmons' best friend, Terry Fitzgerald, was actually taken from the name of Todd MacFarlane's best friend at the time when he created the character for Image Comics. And in a similar vein, Al Simmons' wife, Wanda Blake, played by actress Teresa Randall, was actually named after Todd MacFarlane's wife, Wanda. And the child that Wanda and Terry eventually have together was named after Todd MacFarlane's daughter, Cyan. And the character Al Simmons himself was named after one of Todd MacFarlane's old roommates. But speaking of Wanda, she begins to pull out of her driveway in her white 1995 Saab 900 Cabrio as the song Familiar by DJ Greyboy and Incubus plays on her car radio. And under her rear view mirror, we can actually see a heart-shaped air freshener with the words "love and bandages" under Clown's ugly-ass demonic face, foreshadowing his current influence on her family's life. Al then leaves the house as well and heads to A6 headquarters with Terry. And as Terry scans his ID to enter the facility, we can see that he holds the position of operations analyst and that his date of birth is March 17th, 1964, making him 32 years old, which is about 3 years younger than actor D.B. Sweeney's actual age at the time. Al Simmons then goes to confront Jason in his office and tells him to send the ruthless agent Jessica Priest to do his dirty work instead of him. Played by actress Melinda Clarke, the character Jessica Priest was actually originally created created for this movie as a stand-in for the character Chapel, who was actually a male named Bruce Stinson in the comics. However, the character Chapel was originally created by Rob Liefeld, the co-creator of Marvel's Deadpool. So despite the character Chapel playing a main role in the death of comic book Al Simmons, the Spawn movie production did not have the rights to use that particular character. So they decided to make a completely new character named Priest as a nod to the whole Chapel theme. Jessica Priest would also become canon within the Spawn comic book continuity in 1997 with the release of Spawn issue number 61. But yeah, Al tells Jason that he's out, but Jason somehow manages to convince him to go on one last mission for him in North Korea to supposedly stop them from creating biological weapons of mass destruction. But it turns out it was all a ruse in order to burn Simmons alive while simultaneously releasing the North Korean bioweapon on an unsuspecting town nearby in order to test out the apocalypse disease. But what's even more wild is how Michael would actually welcome the heat of the flames after the production covered him in an extremely cold liquid purposely meant to keep him safe and cool.
I wasn't afraid of fire, but I did want to be safeguarded against anything happening. They soaked me down in this ice gel. This gel that sits in ice for 4 days prior to being applied. I don't think I've ever been as cold in my life. I was cold before you put this on me.
We're gonna go ahead and light Michael up on fire. Here we go. Let's roll sound, please.
Ready and fire.
See you in hell, Al.
Time's up. Time's up.
When they lit the fire, I actually felt good for a second. and I really didn't mind doing other takes of it. Because I'm like, man, I am so cold. Please light me on fire once again.
So it looks a lot more dangerous than it really is. That's essentially the key to what we're doing. But it must appear to be amazingly demonically frightening.
But yeah, after his death and descent into hell, the movie flashes forward 5 years to the year 2001. Al Simmons wakes up looking like a crispy Mr. Potato Head, a look that took a maximum of 4 hours in the production's makeup chair to achieve. But what made things even more annoying is how uncomfortable and unbearably hot all the prosthetics were to wear, especially the yellow contacts in his eyes, which irritated his eyeballs to no end. And whenever the Spawn mask came on, Michael would find it incredibly hard to breathe, which sounds absolutely awful. Like bro went through all that suffering only for the final product to be a pile of hot garbage. But hey, that's Hollywood for you.
All right, I'm gonna go cry.
And of course, Michael Jai White wasn't the only cast member that had to endure hours of applying makeup. John Leguizamo had to as well for his incredible transformation into a 4-foot-tall bowling ball of a demon. And because John Leguizamo is around 5'8" in real life, he would be forced to sustain a squat whenever he was acting as a clown. But another unfortunate thing that John Leguizamo was forced to do in his suit was hold his bladder, a challenge that he apparently failed at least one time over the course of production. Apparently, bro had to take a piss so bad that he literally decided to just let the rain fall down his legs while in the suit. And I honestly don't blame him, considering that it apparently took him a full hour to get the suit off of his body every time. And when nature calls, a man must drain his balls, because everybody knows that's where the pee is stored. That's a scientific fact. Don't Google it. Pee is stored in the balls, confirmed. But anyways, after Clown has a good laugh at Crispy Simmons, Simmons makes his way out of an abandoned church and into an alley of hobos and junior hobos. And after a junior hobo graciously offers him a drink, Simmons is immediately confronted by Cagliostro, a man who keeps glowing green because he smells like shit, most likely. In the original Spawn comics, Cagliostro is seen with a long beard, but in this movie, the character does not have one. This is because Cagliostro actor Nicole Williamson straight up refused to grow one, or even wear a fake beard for that matter. Like, even though he was an immensely talented actor, that dude was notoriously hard to work with throughout his entire career, if I'm being honest. And Cagliostro would actually end up being Williamson's final role of his film career before his death in December 2011. But before Williamson was even offered the role, the production actually gave the role of Cagliostro to actor Richard Harris, but he would end up dropping out. But anyways, the song Long Road Out of Hell by Marilyn Manson and the Sneaker Pimps plays before Cagliostro attempts to convince Simmons to hang out with him and all of his homeless homies. But Al rejects the offer because he has a loving and loyal wife at home just waiting for him to come back, and she would never ever get remarried worried ever. Oh wait, turns out over the course of the last 5 years, Terry was putting his Fitzgerald all up in Al's wife and got her knocked up, giving birth to a little mixed baby named Cyan. And apparently Cyan's a little freak who finds clowns to be a fun attraction to have at a party because Clown was hired by Wanda and Terry to perform, which is insane. That dude would look so creepy and was saying weird ass things to the kids. Why did the parents let him stay for as long as they did? And while Simmons is watching the party like a creep, he's immediately recognized by his dog Spaz. Al's dog recognizing him is the thing that also happens in Spawn issue number 3 when Spawn attempts to visit his wife. And even though comic Spawn's transformation magic only allowed him to do a Drewski type transformation into a white man, his dog Shauna was still able to recognize his former master by his smell. But anyways, Terry and Wanda then find Mr. Peanut talking to their daughter and immediately kick him and the freaky ass Clown out altogether. The two then make their way to a random alley in the city where Clown starts complaining to himself about having been turned into a clown by Malboja, saying that he hates clowns like the famous TV clown Bozo the Clown, McDonald's mascot Ronald McDonald, as well as Chuckles the Clown from the Mary Tyler Moore Show from the 70s. Spawn and Clown having a conversation in a trashy alley as part of their first meeting is straight out of the pages of Spawn number 2, which is kind of fun to see. And what's also straight out of the comic books is the yellow smiley face pin that Clown wears on his clothes. Not only does this seem like a nod to Alan Moore's infamous Watchmen comics, but it's also a direct reference to Spawn issue number 34. In that issue, there are a series of smiley face themed peepholes that creepy dudes would use to watch women mud wrestle, with the eyeballs of the smiley face being the eyeballs of the person behind the wall watching the women. And even though it's kind of confusing why the production would reference such a random element from the comics, I think it's very much in line with Clown's true identity as the Violator, because those guys watching the women wrestle through those peepholes were being violators themselves. So it's a nice bit of symbolism there. But yeah, because Clown is a nice guy, he decides to refresh Al's memory as to the deal that he made with the devil to kill Jason Wynn and lead his army in exchange for resurrection. And during Clown's ramble, Clown references the 1946 film It's a Wonderful Life when he compares himself to the guardian angel character Clarence and Spawn to the main character John Bailey, played by actor Jimmy Stewart.
Just think of me as your guardian angel, the clown from hell. You're Jimmy Stewart and I'm Clarence. Every time somebody farts, a demon catches her wings. Oops.
Clown then teleports Spawn to the site of his own grave to prove that he is indeed dead. In issue 17 of the Spawn comics, Spawn would discover that he was buried with honors at Arlington Cemetery in Virginia before digging up his grave to view his rotted corpse. And as movie Spawn digs, a group of Satan lovers nearby attempt to communicate with their Dark Lord while listening to Silverchair's Spawn theme music in the background. Meanwhile, over at the grave, Clown sings a parody of the famous 1899 Tim Pan Alley song, Hello My Baby, when Spawn discovers a locket of him and his wife inside of his grave.
Someone's a little angry because they died and went to hello, my mutant, hello, my carcass, hello, my fucking infested corpse.
Then suddenly, the necroplasm within Spawn starts to activate, wrapping itself all around Spawn before Clown teleports them back to the alley. Now, one of the main differences between the Spawn comics and this movie is the fact that Spawn is always typically seen wearing his iconic red cape in the source material. However, because CGI wasn't as advanced as it is today, the cost to produce a convincing looking CGI cape would have been way too much and would have caused the production to go over budget. So because of this, the cape only really appears briefly in order to help Spawn glide or turn invisible. But yeah, at the end of the conversation, Clown then grabs a slice of worm-infested pizza before leaving. Wax worms that John Leguizamo actually ate in real life like he was some sort of contestant on Joe Rogan's Fear Factor. So as you can imagine, John immediately blew massive chunks at the end of that take because that shit is gross as hell, man. And with Jason Wynn now on Spawn's sights, thanks to the demon on his shoulder, Cagliostro immediately appears as the angel on Spawn's other shoulder to try to convince him to chill out. However, Spawn immediately dismisses him and charges after Wynn anyway. The movie then transitions to A6 headquarters where Jason Wynn and Priest are watching the news. And when we get a shot of a bunch of news sources, we get a reference to the Spawn comics in the form of this bearded man in the middle of the frame speaking on the My View on 2 program. Ever since appearing in the very first Spawn issue, this bearded news pundit makes frequent appearances throughout the Spawn comics, offering his commentary on the various vigilante and crime activity in the city. And after watching his PR guy, Terry Fitzgerald make him look good on the news, Jason and Priest have a nice little laugh about how their Heat-16 virus is going to make them rich and powerful before heading to a party at a Swiss embassy, with the exterior of that building actually being the Fine Arts Building in downtown Los Angeles. And upstairs at the party, Jason Wynn tells a couple of guests that his Heat-16 is ready to roll. But amongst these corrupt leaders is this seemingly random woman in a green dress and Spawn-themed earrings. This is actually a reference to the angelic Hellspawn hunter Angela, introduced in Spawn issue number 9. Since writer Neil Gaiman wrote that issue,
bad blood,
he would eventually retain the rights to the Angela character after a long legal battle with Todd MacFarlane. So when the rights finally reverted back to Neil Gaiman, Gaiman would sell the character Angela to Marvel Comics, with the character eventually being rewritten into Marvel canon as an Asgardian goddess, specifically Aldrif Odin's daughter, the firstborn daughter of Odin. But not long after Wynn arrives at the party, Spawn arrives to crash it, with weapons that he stole from the armory at A6 headquarters. This leads into a firefight between Spawn and Jessica Priest that ends with Priest getting a bullet to the head. And a little bit later, after Spawn escapes with the armed response to his arrival, we see Jessica Priest's body being placed inside of a cold storage box after she's declared dead. However, this was originally not supposed to be the end for Jessica Priest. If the production followed through with their initial plan, Jessica Priest was going to be resurrected with a cybernetic body, becoming the Spawn villain Overkill, who made their first appearance in Spawn issue number 6. But speaking of Spawn's escape from the party, after we see Spawn use his Venom-inspired wall-crawling abilities to make his way onto the roof, we see him activate his weird-looking 1997 CGI cape to fly away. And while Spawn flying away was always the plan, the production originally wanted Spawn to create wings out of his necro flesh, but that never ended up materializing. However, there would eventually be a Spawn action figure made based on very early concept art of that idea. And after Wynn's brush with death, he meets back up with Clown, who somehow convinces him to put a device directly on his heart that will detonate the Heat-16 bombs if he ever dies. Because for some reason, Malbosia needs Spawn to kill Wynn in order to begin the apocalypse, instead of just, telling Wynn to just release the virus, but whatever. But anyways, after a while, Spawn heads back to the rooftop of the church in order to rearm himself. However, Spawn would be confronted by Clown yet again, who mockingly says, "Here's Clowny" when he arrives, a reference to the classic "Here's Johnny" introduction to Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, as well as Jack Nicholson's iconic line from The Shining.
Here's Clowny.
Here's Johnny.
Spawn then confronts Clown for being the one to order his execution and rejects his role as the leader of an army of the damned. And after attacking Clown, the Clown gets angry and says the following:
No more clowning around. I'm not the vindicator, or the victimizer, or the vaporizer, or the violator. I'm a violator!
This line is a direct reference to the Clown's demonic brothers from the Spawn comics, known as the Flebiac brothers. There's the Vindicator, the Vaporizer, the Vandalizer, the Vacillator, and of course, the Violator, Clown's true hell name and form. The sequence of Clown transforming into the Violator actually took the VFX team a full 8 months to do, which is absolutely wild when you think that some kid could probably do that shit on his phone in less than 5 minutes these days. And after transforming into his Violator form, the two of them start fighting before they fall from the church roof into an alley below. And when Spawn gets up, he accidentally comes face to face with a homeless man, with this homeless man being played by Spawn creator Todd MacFarlane himself. The two of them start tussling some more before the Violator throws Spawn across the alley, crucifying him on a fence like the underworld messiah that he is. And with Spawn having lost their battle, the Violator does a victory dance before doing an impression of Terminator star Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You've been violated, girly man, huh?
And after Clown leaves after threatening to head to Wanda's place to hurt her, Cagliostro yoinks Spawn off the fence and convinces Spawn to let him be the Yoda to his Luke Skywalker and train him on how to use his necroplasm.
Now try your chains.
You must visualize your objective. The armor does the rest.
All right, Yoda, just wait a second. You ready? All right, go! Not bad.
And after a quick lesson from Cagliostro, a Spawn, confident in his new superpowers, ditches the guns and steals a 1995 Honda CBR 600 motorcycle to rescue his ex-wife. Spawn then manages to track Clown down as Clown drives a truck of Necro goo from Necro Trans Incorporated around the city. As Clown tries to ram Spawn off the road, we can see Spawn's stunt actor about to wipe out from a fence, violently jutting out towards him. But luckily, that stunt actor did not sustain any life-threatening injuries. And as the chase continues, Clown says the line, "I love the smell of burning asphalt in the morning," which is a reference to the iconic line from 1979's Apocalypse Now.
I love the smell of burning asphalt in the morning.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Their chase eventually ends with Clown's truck crashing directly into Spawn's ultra-durable Necro shield, with the resulting explosion sending Clown flying away to Wanda's place. And over at Wanda's, Wanda has a dream about her hamburger-faced ex-husband trying to reach out to her, which is something that also happens to Wanda at the very end of Spawn issue number 4. And meanwhile, Terry looks over the data on Heat 16 that he stole from Jason Wynn and discovers that Wynn is planning on spreading this deadly disease from 14 locations across the world: Los Angeles, California, New York City, Mexico City, Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires, London, Rome, Morocco, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe,
Mozambique, Zambia, Swaziland, Gambia, Guinea, Algeria, Ghana,
Moscow, Japan, the Philippines, and Sydney, Australia. But suddenly, the Fitzgerald family is confronted by Jason Wynn, who is pretty pissed off at Terry for downloading his naughty browser history onto a Nintendo GameCube disc. Clown soon joins Jason Wynn at the house and shows little Cyan how wacky and unhinged he can be. Clown's reality-bending comedy in this movie feels very inspired by Robin Williams' performance as Genie in the 1992 animated Aladdin film from Disney, a movie that was very popular with kids at the time. And when Spawn arrives at the house, he finds Jason Wynn holding his wife hostage before seemingly stabbing her in the chest. But it wasn't actually Wanda, but Clown in disguise, hoping that Spawn would kill Jason Wynn to avenge his dead ex-wife, an action that would not only kill Wanda, but also Cyan, Terry, and the rest of the world. And after Spawn uses his powers to remove the bond from Jason's heart, the Violator drags both Spawn and a newly arrived Cagliostro into Hell for an awful CGI battle. And what's kind of funny is that Hell wasn't originally supposed to be a location in this movie at all. The original idea was to just make Hell a regular dark room. But Mark DePay, being the VFX nerd that he is, wanted to give the audience a full look at Malebolgia's fiery realm.
This was a bad idea.
But speaking of Malebolgia, Mark DePay and his team originally envisioned bringing the character to life via puppetry, which would have honestly been a much better move in my opinion, because the CGI abominations they used in the movie was just not good at all. But yeah, after their extremely hard to watch fight, Spawn flies away from Hell with Cagliostro and back into the Fitzgerald household. The Violator tries once again to attack them one more time, but Spawn uses his big black head to chop off Clown's big fat head, leading to his return to Hell, vowing to get his revenge on Spawn in the process. But that vengeance would of course never come on account of this movie being poo-poo pee-pee. Police and news crews then surround the Fitzgerald house before Terry snitches on Jason Wynn and his plans on releasing Satan's COVID-19 onto the world. The two police officers escorting Jason Wynn out of the house during the media frenzy are none other than detectives Sam Burke and Twitch Williams from the Spawn comics in a quick little cameo. And the movie ends with Spawn standing on top of a church's cross, Spawn's favorite spot to perch over ever since Spawn issue number 2. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of Spawn 1997. What was your favorite part of the movie? Let us know in the comment section down below. Y'all can follow me at Mastertainment on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Twitch, wherever I am on the internet, but most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. But like always, I've been MT, you guys have been amazing, and I'll catch you Hellspawn later. Peace.